2 of our series looking back at Derbyshire's trophy wins. We're on to the 1981 NatWest. But again, much like with our 36th instalment, it's important to look back beyond that and how the groundworks were laid by one Eddie Barlow.
Yes, I mean, my first 3 years as a member of Derbyshire, we finished bottom, next to bottom and bottom of the championship. And in late 1975, George Hughes, the chairman, approached Charlie Elliott, who played in the 36 championship winning side, was the chairman of cricket. He'd been a test selector, he'd been a test match umpire. He was a very, very revered figure within the game, and said, what are we going to do about cricket in Derbyshire? This is not good enough. And he said, well, you've got to sign the best player you can. Sobers had retired, so he went for Eddie Barlow. And Barlow came to Derbyshire on a big salary, with great expectation. Scored nearly 2,000 runs in all cricket in his first season, took 111 wickets at 16 in one-day cricket. So he was, although he was 35 when he arrived, he was no mug. He wasn't finished, that is the case. But he didn't come as captain because Bob Taylor was initially the captain. But Bob argued during 1976 that his glove work he was struggling with the gloves, and no one else had noticed because Bob was peerless, But when he stood down, Eddie seemed like the obvious player to replace him. And Barlow put in place what is now normal. We see it as the norm. But he put in place exercise regimes, a physical programme that said, we don't have to pay to be good at fielding. So we're going to be the best at fielding. And he ran cricketers up to Bradshaw and he ran them all around the racecourse and he got them fit, and we became the best fielding side in the country. And in 1977 and 78 he went to away games and you sat there as the crowd gave Derbyshire players the bird, because they would come out and start doing exercises. It sounds a bit embarrassing now, but they were doing warm-ups at the side of the pavilion that hitherto no one had ever seen in domestic cricket. But it worked. Derbyshire rose up the table, finished 7th in the championship in 77. We got a Benson Hedges final in 78. But more importantly, he changed the culture around Derbyshire cricket, which had been one of kind of shoulder slump, we can't do anything here, to no, we can actually. And we reached the point in 78, I think we played 13 consecutive one-day matches, won 11 of them, and you went to away games and instead of being the pushovers, you could see people, opposition spectators, you could hear them around you talking about, that's that Barlow chap, he can bat, that Peter Kirsten. A mention of Kirsten is that he was signed, as was John Wright, by Eddie Barlow as overseas cricketers, and he really took a punt on John Wright. He'd only played 12 first-class games before he signed him. But he also got Mike Hendricks super fit and probably as good an opening bowler as there was in the country in that late 70s period. And he got Jeff Miller believing that he could actually be a test cricketer. We'd already got Bob Taylor. And then around us we got people like Colin Tunnicliffe and the young and emerging Kim Barnett, Alan Hill. There were plenty of good players around. But Eddie had always said it was a three-year deal, and when he left at the end of 78, that was it. So there was a little bit of rebuilding, and that rebuilding included bringing in David Steele from Northamptonshire, who'd won one-day cricket trophy with Northamptonshire, and Barry Wood from Lancashire, who'd won numerous trophies with Lancashire, and both of them were test cricketers. So what you'd got is the Barlow-driven team supplemented with people who knew how to win. So by the time you got to 1981, you got a team which included either 8 players who had already or would go on to play Test cricket. Throw in Paul Newman, who was an emerging young cricketer, Alan Hill and Colin Tunnicliffe, and suddenly you'd got a really, really solid county cricket team. Yeah,
and I suppose the biggest thing there as well isn't just, you talk about having that the developments of things, what we would now call sports science, but warm-ups and just a bit more professionalism and preparation, but also the mentality of Derbyshire no longer going into games thinking it'd be good if we can get a win here, so we're going to win here, and that was echoed in the journey to the final, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at that competition that year, Derbyshire won. I mean, Alan Hill famously said many years later, when we won the final, we won by virtue of losing fewer wickets. And the following day, we went and played another game in the Sunday League and got hammered. And he said, just imagine one run less. He said it would have been the worst weekend of my life. But you see, as we will see when we talk about 1990 and 1993, close victories, and indeed 2012, close victories are the hallmark of really good sides. And so winning a semi-final down here by virtue of losing fewer wickets against Essex and then winning the final shows incredible nerve. As again, we talked about the 36 side as having talent, but it's having the nerve and the character to be able to do those things. I mean, the semi-final down here was a great example. Barnett top scored a very low scoring game, but this 19-year-old lad went out there and got the man of the match, scoring 57 or whatever. And these things happen in those kind of environments where a young player, and it is probably worth mentioning this because Barnett in the modern game might not have succeeded as he did back then, but Barnett came into a Derbyshire team that had got Peter Kirsten and Barry Wood and John Wright and David Steele ahead of him. So he was kind of given a bit of licence, and we sometimes forget that, I guess, with young cricketers. If you come into a struggling team, it can be very difficult for you to emerge as a fully fledged cricketer. But when you go into a team that's doing well or that's got good experienced players ahead of you and they say, go on kid, just go and hit the ball, that can be quite a relieving and a career-changing opportunity, really. So that's what you'd got with that side. You'd got some real experience, but a couple of youngsters who were kind of given the head a little bit.
And what was it like to be a fan during those close matches?
Well, I think the thing was that during that period, one of the great things about knockout cricket in English cricket, and it's gone, and it is just a fact that it's gone, was that the old saying, every dog has its day, meant that if you look statistically, look back at that period between the mid-70s and the mid-90s, almost every county had quarterfinals, semi-finals and finals, because like in any knockout competition, there's always that possibility that on your day you can do particularly well. And so we got used to it. In 78, we got to the 75, we got to the semi-final of the Gillette. In 1978, we got to the final of the Benson Hedges. 79, we got through to the semi-final. So by 1981, we'd kind of had we'd had 5-6 years of being used to at least getting to a quarter-final, semi-final. But it was great, and great obviously to have big matches down here where you got big crowds, live usually on the television. And it was just fun. It was just fun. But the other thing was that you always sensed there'd be another one coming along soon. And so it developed through the 80s and into the 90s that you never really had to worry too long about where the next one was coming from. The downside, and the modern blast is a fascinating competition. It's great fun. But the downside is that you've got to be consistent in that league. The beauty of winning, as Derbyshire did, the NatWest in 81, I think we finished 14th out of 17 in the championship. Never really showed any progress in the championship, but it didn't matter, because so long as you got your team on the day performing, and beating Notts down here in the quarter-final, they've got an astonishing star-studded team. But we beat them because on the basis that every dog has its day. And that's what happened. A good team, but they were a bit of a cup team, if you like, to use football parlance, but a very good one.
Yeah. And when you've got, a big crowd at Derby down here for one of those big games, the atmosphere, I imagine in those days, was even more raucous than you might see now.
Yeah, perhaps so, but on the other hand, being here for that T20 match a couple of years ago when we played the Birmingham Bears, the Lancashire one, when George Scrimshaw bowled the final over, and I said at the time it was the noisiest I'd known the county ground this century. And it was a throwback to, I'm a great believer that Derbyshire supporters, if you put them something out there, that you give them something to cheer about, they'll cheer, they'll grab onto it. And it doesn't have to necessarily be winning a trophy, but putting the effort in, getting a quarter-final here or there, a semi-final or whatever, finals there, people will get behind them because they want to get behind the team. But you've got to give them something to cheer first.
Yeah, and we of course did have something to cheer at the final. You've talked about how tight a game it was, but what was that like? Firstly, for Derbyshire, not for the first time, but to get to a Lord's final and to be on that stage, but then also to go and win the trophy. What was that like?
I think winning it was a kind of pinch yourself thing. But the strange thing about winning that trophy was the joy for people who had followed Derbyshire going back, in many cases, to the 30s and 40s, because we tend to forget, 1981, where are we? If you were 20 in 1941, you were 60. I'm 62 now. So it's quite possible to have been a teenager during the 30s and having then watched for all those years and not won anything until Lords. So it was a pinch yourself moment, and it was also a kind of, we've arrived, we're at the top table, we're a winner. It transformed the club because the club said, right, we're going to build a pavilion. Bear in mind, we hadn't had a pavilion for 27 years, but the club decided, surely we've got to do something to mark this achievement. But what it also did was, I've already mentioned, the following day Derbyshire played Sussex at Hove in a Sunday League game, and Hendrick had got injured during the final, so didn't play the following day, and indeed the team that won the final never played together again. Those 11 players never ever played together again. Steele went straight back to Northants. Within 2 years, Barry Wood had gone, and a lot of that team had just disappeared. And there was that sense of it came together for that one glorious moment in London, but then it broke up, and it did break up. But that's okay. It doesn't take away the memory of winning a trophy.
And lastly, just on that, I suppose more than anything shows that there is always life after departing players, but also there is always hope to rebuild and things on the horizon. Absolutely.
And also I think you got to keep the faith. I mean, there are those who think, Derbyshire will never win anything again. Well, the odds are greater against us winning things because there's one trophy less to play for, and also because there was a knockout competition which gave you a chance, as we will see once again in 1993 when we come to it, an opportunity in a handful of games to win a trophy. But you've still got to have that belief. And I guess if Eddie Barlow's greatest legacy for me was that he made me believe, and I guess this can sound quite trite, but it's still there. It still burns in me, because when we got to finals day, when we won down here in 2017 to get to the quarter final, and I had tears in my eyes. You can't help that, and the tears were there because you thought, this is my Derbyshire. We're in a quarter final. That's all we'd done. Reached a quarter final. For many, it's just means nothing. It's just an expectation. But it was just wonderful, and to go to finals day and see those 800-900 Derbyshire supporters all sitting over together in that stand with shirts on, some with old Derbyshire t-shirts on that still didn't fit them, but it was just great. It was great because they believed. And let's face it, if we'd beaten Essex that day, who knows, we could have won it. So you've got to have faith, and it does. Even if a side breaks up, yes, there's still the possibility you can rebuild and go again.